Hey y'all, Coach Inthefight here, and in today's class, we're going to be coming out of the Book of Enoch. Now, I want to share something with you at the beginning of the Book of Enoch. We're going to be going to about chapter 71 as we talk about the new moon. But I just wanted to read this part in light of all that's going on in the world. It says, "The word of the blessing of Enoch, how he blessed the elect and the righteous who were to exist in the time of trouble, rejecting all the wicked and ungodly." So he's written this book for us. In the first sentence here, we see this book is written for us. And if you have questions about the legitimacy of this book, let's go over to the book of Jude in the New Testament. You see right there where it says, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of his saints." You see that here in verse 9 of chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1. "Behold, he cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon them and destroy the wicked and reprove all the carnal for everything which the sinful and ungodly have done and committed against him." So you see that Jude has actually quoted Enoch. For those who are questioning this book of Enoch is actually the first book on the planet. It's the first book ever written. You remember Enoch being talked about in the book of Genesis. Let's go over there. There are two Enochs in the Bible. The one son of Cain, you see there in chapter 4. But then you start hearing about the forefathers, our forefathers there in chapter 5. You see that he is the son of Jared, not Cain. But anyway, this particular Enoch we see in verse 22 walked with God. It said, "And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters." This is Noah's granddaddy. Methuselah is Noah's dad. And when you look at this word God here, we see, of course, this word God is talking about Elohim. Strong's number 430. This is who we refer to when we talk about angels, anything in the spirit world, even our grandparents. We are Elohim too, but we are gods too, but we don't consider ourselves gods because we are powerless, trapped in these bodies that we have here. But once we shed these bodies, especially if we've done what we were supposed to do down here on earth, we're able to move on to higher mansions. Some of us will become these guardian angel types that will help humanity, and we call them Elohim. We call them angels. So Enoch, as a human being, is what they're talking about, actually walked with these gods. And you say, well, why is that important? Well, because he taught them the book of the revolutions of the luminaries of heaven that we see down in chapter 71. And that's what his class is going to come out of today as we talk about the new moon, praise our Father in heaven, and give the new moon report for the upcoming season, summer 2025. I'm going to go over here to Coach Inthefight and pull me a calendar up, Abba willing, which looks like this for the spring of 2025. And when we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we see that we are expecting a 0% moon at 10:31. That would be AM on June 25th, 2025. When we come over here to the U.S. Naval Observatory, looking at the fraction of the moon illuminated for June of 2025, we see that the moon goes completely dark on the 25th, as we saw on the report, and then starts to show its light on the 26th, and that being 1800 hours, that could very well be the time that it appears. The thing about that, the time that it actually appears, that 2%, is when we look in chapter 72, verse 5, it says, "At that time it appears and becomes to you the beginning of the month." So that's how we know when a month starts, according to the first book ever written on our planet, is when the new moon appears. But I think everybody can get a good understanding of that by now. I mean, we do understand that month comes from month. But if we go back to the previous chapter, he tells us about these seasons. So we're not really talking about the month here. We're talking about the beginning of the season. So how do we know that we're at the beginning of the season? Well, we have to go back to the first chapter. And while we're there, let's look at the first law of the luminaries. We see there in verse 2. It says, "The sun and the light arrive at the gates of heaven, which are on the east, and on the west of it at the western gates of heaven." Now you're looking at this part that I have highlighted here after the comma. And that's one thing about the Book of Enoch, is he ain't do real good when it comes to punctuation in some of these translations. And this may be an example, because if we take out this part, which one can consider a parenthetical part, where it says which are on the east and on the west of it, if you take that part out, you still have a complete sentence. And that sentence says, "The sun and the light arrive at the gates of heaven, at the western gates of heaven." Let me say that again. The first law of the luminaries: the sun and the light arrive at the gates of heaven, at the western gates of heaven. So the first law of the luminaries is that the sun shows up to work. And where does he show up at? At the western gates of heaven, not the eastern gates, because that would be morning time. What he's saying is that the first law of the luminaries is that the sun sets. And this is why you see the feast days beginning in the evening instead of the morning. And you see the book of Genesis talking about the evening and the morning, or the first day. And you see that we get our purifications at sunset and all of this. It's because that is the day that the day ends, right there at sunset. And that's what he's telling us here, is that actually a new 24-hour period will start right there when the sun reaches the western gates of heaven. But anyway, let's go on down and let's look at the stars. Because if you remember Genesis chapter 1, we look at verse 14. He says, "And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also." So there are three elements to this. There's the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, to understand the stars, you go to chapter 71, the first chapter in the book of the Revolution of the Luminaries of Heaven. And it starts breaking down the timing of the stars. As you know, we can't see them all the time, especially if we don't have a telescope or have been trained to find these particular constellations and such. Well, they didn't have to, nor did they have to have computers or anything. All they had to have was this understanding. And again, this book was written by Noah's granddaddy. So you could imagine it being passed down to Noah, to Shem, and then Abraham, who had a relationship with Shem. And then Abraham had a relationship with Jacob, and you can imagine this book being passed down through history. The Ethiopians actually still have this book in their Bibles. But anyway, when we come all the way down to the end of this chapter, he starts talking about the equinox and the 364 days of the calendar. Now, this is one of the first things we really need to try to understand. Of course, we can easily understand that the day resets at sunset. We can understand that the moon starts with, or the month starts with the appearance of the moon. But this we need to pay a little more attention to make sure we have a solid grasp of this and understanding. Like you see right there in verse 42, it says, at that period, the night becomes shortened. It is 9 parts, and the night is equal with the day. The year is precisely 364 days. Now, anybody who's studying the 364-day Enochian calendar needs to really study this. Needs to really get a good grasp on this verse here. Now, this is verse 42. So when he's talking about at this period, he's already been through all 12 periods. Some of us would call those months, but it's not necessarily months, because you remember months begin with moons, not these periods. These periods are the relationship between the earth and the sun. The moon is not even really talked about in here, except to do a cameo appearance at the beginning she does. But she's really featured in the next chapter. Well, in this one, it's more so about the sun. You remember, we didn't hear much about him up there. That, he starts today. But then now it's really about the sun's relationship to the stars. And what will happen if we make it to the end here, make it to the, we get the understanding is once you have the sun starting off the day, and then we look to see its relationship to the stars, those things we call constellations, then we wait for the representation of the moon, or the appearance of the moon, to know when we will start these particular periods. Now, this one is talking about the start of the year. You see, verse 42, it says, at that period, the night becomes shortened. It is 9 parts. So at that period, so after you've done gone through all of these months, you're looking at this particular one, because we're talking about the 364th day. So it says, it is 9 parts, and the night is equal with the day. So this is what we mean by equinox, equal day and equal nights. So Enoch was the first one to explain this to us. Now, we can get a good understanding of it. Scientists have a grasp on the equinox, and you do have what's called the Equilux. And I have studied the Equilux. It does come a little bit before. The only problem with the Equilux is it's dependent on your particular area, which means your Equilux time is going to be different than mine, and we need a computer to figure it out. So it's in other words, they couldn't have done that back there in Enochian times. They would have had to be on one accord, and they would have had to use eyesight, not computers. And so it would have been more like the equinox. And to take comfort in that, let me show you the difference. You go to timeanddate.com. Well, look, the timing that we're talking about is March 20th in the year 2025. And on March the 20th, but you see that the total daylight is 12 hours, 8 minutes. And if I wanted to get exactly 12, I would have to go to either March 16th or March the 15th. See, I can't really be sure. And I would have to have a computer to do it. And if you look at your zip code, if you put in your zip code, like let's put in the zip code for Beverly Hills. I remember the show, what was it, 90210. We go to March the 20th. We see they have 12 minutes, 12:09. They're 12:09 on the 20th. But then if we go back to exactly when it's 12, we see that they straight up on the 16th. So they're given a different time than we are, a different day than we are. And so that's many reasons why we know that the equinox is what it is, opposed to the equilux. So this equinox begins this 364-day cycle. Now, what we have to understand, because we're this early in the book, again, we haven't heard about the moon. That's not until the next chapter. This is what they call the tropical year or the solar year. This is only the sun's year. This is not the sacred year. This is not the biblical year. This is not the year that we use to pick our feast days, because it does not have the representation of the moon. You have all three parts that must go together: the sun, the moon, and these stars. And then once you put these three together, then you can start worrying about feast days and great days and even biblical days. But anyways, let's see what else Enoch says. Now we come, so that's at the end. That's verse 42. We don't plan on making it that far down and hearing more about these. Well, we're going to hear more about the 364 days, but we want to go all the way back up to the beginning of the month. That was at the end of the year, the 364th day. So let's go back up and hear about the first day. Now, you hear again here in verse 8, it's giving us another opportunity to learn how the sun begins the day. It says, the sun sets in heaven, and returning by the north to proceed towards the east is conducted so as to enter by that gate and illuminate the face of heaven. So it starts in the west, goes around through the north, then it comes towards the east when it starts to brighten up the day. But then you notice that when it comes around to the east, it's conducted so as to enter by that gate and to illuminate the face of heaven. So this is what we're talking about here when we talk about the stars, is these gates. He's not going to name the stars. Let's go back and look at our calendar. He's not going to name these stars or these celestials. They may or may not even be important. We can argue that in the comment section, because what he's really telling us is the timing. And it's represented on this celestial clock calendar with these lines here. Those lines there are the gates. In other words, when this is the hand that represents the stars, it's now showing us in the fourth gate. This gate is gate 4. Gate 4 extends all the way over to here as well. So it'll go through gate 4. We'll read this in Enoch, but here's a good illustration. You go through gate 4, and then you'll enter gate 5, which is here. And then you'll go through gate 6, which is here. And we'll learn in Enoch that you'll spend 2 cycles. We'll spend 2 periods in gate 6. And then we'll go back to gate 5, and then gate 4. And then we'll come back around to gate 3 in the fall. And then gate 2, and then we'll spend 2 periods in gate 1 before we turn back to gate 2, then gate 3 at the end of the year. Verse 9 says, in the same manner it goes forth in the first month by the great gate. Okay, and let me go back to our illustration here. You see how these gates are bigger in size than these gates. This is gate 6 right here. You see how small gate 6 is. It only goes from here to about right there. See how this one is bigger. But then the biggest gates are the 2 in the middle, gate 3 and gate 4. That's what he means, the great gates. Plural. There's 2 great gates. But notice he says that the first month by the great gate, or you see the other translations call them portals. You see in verse 10 it says it goes forth through the 4th of those 6 gates, which are at the rising of the sun. So you have 6 gates. But at the first month, it doesn't start at gate 1. Gate 1 is up here in January. This is why the Gregorian calendar starts in gate 1, starting up here around January. Wintertime. Winter solstice time. The Enochian calendar, the sacred calendar, starts down by spring time. So it doesn't start in the first gate. It starts in the 4th gate. Just like the book says. It goes forth through the 4th of the 6 gates, which are at the rising of the sun. And in the 4th gate, through which the sun with the moon proceeds, in the first part of it, there are 12 open windows from which issue out a flame when they are opened in their proper periods. So now, this is another verse. We talked about a few key verses, but this is definitely another key verse here. It says, and in the 4th gate, through which the sun with the moon proceeds. So you have to have both. And that's how we're talking about the seasons now. We've already talked about the moon representation. We're coming back to get the star representation. And we learn here that we have all 3 meeting up. The sun, the moon, in this particular gate. And he's going to go through each of these 12 periods. And he says, from which issue out a flame when they are opened in their proper period. Now, this flame that he's talking about, we hear about this flame over in the book of Ezekiel, where he says in chapter 46 and verse 1, thus saith the Lord God, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut these 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened, and in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. So what he's talking about is these particular new moons. So what he's saying is when we pay attention to this, then, this, we can actually take part in this. Flame is going out anyway. But if we are doing what we are supposed to be doing on the new moon day, and we can see that over here in Ezekiel 46, when he talks about the inner court. So we could imagine all that's going on behind the scenes. We're told in the book of Psalms to blow out the trumpets on the new moon day. And there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes. Well, that's another reason to get this timing right. Well, you look at verse 12. It says, when the sun rises in heaven, it goes forth through this 4th gate 30 days. And by the 4th gate in the west of heaven on a level with it descends. Let's read this from the Charles translation. The shot is on the right. We've been reading from the Lawrence. When the sun rises in the heaven, he comes forth through that fourth portal 30 mornings in succession and sets accurately in the fourth portal in the west of heaven. So this is talking about this period of time from the equinox until we reach the next gate. He's saying it's 30 days. He says, and during this period, the day becomes daily longer and a night nightly shorter to the 30th morning. And then he goes on to even tell us how many parts are in the day. Whereas before, the days and the nights were equal. We see right here that he says, on that day, the day is longer than the night by a ninth part, and the day amounts to exactly 10 parts, and the night to 8 parts. So the days are no longer equal. And he says this lasts for 30 days. And then if we keep going, we'll see that there's another 30-day period before we enter another gate. And then again, we see a difference in the length of the day. And this goes on until we get down to about verse 17, where he says where we enter the 6th gate. But then you see that there are 31 days. So you had 30, 30, and 31. This is where we get the 91-day seasons. So when we're looking at a calendar, that we start here, and then we have 1/4 of the year, which we call spring, until we get here. And then we have another quarter of the year, talking about the tropical year. We have tropical summer from this point to here, these 91 days. And then you have the next 91 days, of course, will be the fall and then the winter. All right, y'all, for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and end this video, calling it part 1 of 2. In the second part, we'll give more detail about the season and how we understand the season. But in the meantime, let's prepare for the day of remembrance. If we see the new moon day on tomorrow evening, June the 26th, then that would make June the 27th the day of remembrance. Yom Zikkaron. This is a big barbecue day around the family, so we got to get prepared for that. And I wanted to go ahead and give everybody a heads up. So make sure you subscribe so you can see part 2, Abba willing. If you got anything out of this one, go ahead and hit the like button. And go ahead and jump over to coachinthefight.shop, peruse around, take a look at what we got. And I'll see you there. Shalom.